Welcome to Official History World, where history comes alive. Explore the events, empires, and people that shaped our world. Subscribe and be part of our journey through time.
It was a time of immense hardship, where families struggled to make ends meet, businesses shuttered their doors, and entire communities faced uncertainty and despair. The Great Depression is the greatest and longest economic recession in modern world history. Economists and historians often describe the Great Depression as one of the largest, catastrophic economic events of the 20th century. The situation in the U.S. was so dire that people would wait for hours in lines just to get a piece of bread and free coffee. But what were the actual causes of the Great Depression that devastated one of the strongest nations in the world?
Closing time. The close of an era. In the 1920s, the great American word was prosperity. Now the 30s have begun and there is a new word, depression.
In the 1920s, after the end of the First World War, European countries were exhausted. Due to the war, production of goods had halted in Europe, and the economy suffered. Europe found itself in need of food, grains, and weapons, which they couldn't produce themselves. The United States, in a position of unparalleled economic dominance, seized this opportunity. Large-scale production of all kinds of goods kicked into high gear, with the U.S. becoming the world's workshop. From steel to textiles, from machinery to automobiles, American factories hummed with activity, churning out goods at an unprecedented rate. The introduction of electricity and a wave of new inventions further fueled this industrial explosion, revolutionizing the way people lived and worked. This was the era of the Roaring Twenties, a time of economic prosperity, jazz-filled nights, and a seemingly unending boom. New factories were being established, people were getting employed, and the U.S. economy prospered. New inventions like electric washing machines, vacuum cleaners, irons, radios, and refrigerators were all in high demand. The general public constantly bought these new appliances, so the companies behind them grew rapidly. As a result, their shares also increased, and the American people started investing in the stock market. Many ordinary people, as well as professional speculators, played the stock market for the first time. With share prices climbing fast, people were convinced that the stock market was a great way to make money quickly, and some people even took out loans to buy stocks. Thus, the number of banks also increased greatly. Share prices kept increasing throughout the decade. By 1929, it was estimated that 4 million Americans had invested in the stock market. The stock market became a hot topic, and families began putting their life savings into the market without fully understanding the risks. It got to the point that people became addicted to the market, treating it as if it were a casino. This meant they were taking financial risks with high-risk stocks. If the stocks did well, it meant fast profits. However, speculating on stocks and buying them on margin could lead to financial disaster if the stock market declined. But as everything seemed fine, many imagined that this prosperity would go on forever. In October 1929, disaster struck. The cracks that had been forming beneath the surface of the seemingly unstoppable growth suddenly widened. It was Thursday, October 24th, 1929, a day that would become known as Black Thursday. On this day, the stock market experienced a massive sell-off. Panic swept through Wall Street as investors frantically tried to sell their stocks to salvage whatever they could. The market was in freefall, and the losses were staggering. Over 12.9 million shares were sold in a single day. A few days later, things got even worse, and I mean very bad. On October 29th, 1929, also called Black Tuesday, the market fell by 12%. Black Tuesday was even worse than the previous week as 16 million shares were sold in 24 hours. The stock market had lost more than $30 billion in value. This marked the beginning of the Great Depression. This collapse was the most distressing event in the history of the stock exchange. It was so devastating that many investors committed suicide due to their huge losses. One of the most notable incidents was witnessed by Winston Churchill. Churchill was visiting New York at the time of the crash. He first visited the stock market and then returned to his hotel, and while he was there, someone jumped out the window. It turned out he was a Wall Street broker who had been ruined. At the same time, ruined businessmen in New York tried to sell their automobiles and other luxuries for next to nothing. Thousands of people lost their fortunes. Despite this, the government and the elites tried to give false hope that everything was fine and the market would return to normal. The financial giant John D. Rockefeller went and bought some stock in a very public way to show that he too was confident that the economy was sound. He tried to assure everybody that this crash was temporary.
In the 93 years of my life, depressions have come and gone. Prosperity has always returned and will again.
But the damage had been done, and the public had completely lost their trust. President of the U.S., Herbert Hoover lost credibility in the eyes of Americans, as he appeared inactive in response to the crash. He continued with his policies, which worsened the condition of the economy. After Black Tuesday, panic spread rapidly throughout the country. People rushed to banks to withdraw their money, fearing losing everything as the stock market continued its downward spiral. However, the banks did not have enough cash on hand to meet the demands of all their depositors. This was due to the practice known as fractional reserve banking. Banks only kept a fraction of their deposits as cash reserves, using the rest for loans and investments. When a large number of depositors tried to withdraw their money simultaneously, the banks were unable to meet the demand. As word spread that banks were unable to fulfill withdrawal requests, more and more people rushed to their local banks in a desperate attempt to get their money out. This created a vicious cycle, banks selling off assets at fire sale prices to pay depositors only further weakened the banking system. Many banks were forced to close their doors permanently, leaving depositors with nothing. Those who had their savings tied up in these banks lost everything. Families who had entrusted their hard-earned money to these institutions found themselves destitute overnight. Businesses that relied on bank loans for operations suddenly found themselves without capital, leading to widespread closures and job losses.
Some are swept by alarm, and bank after bank across the country is hit by panic withdrawals. New lines appear on American streets, depositors swarming to snatch out what savings they have left before it's too late. Banks by the hundreds, by the thousands are forced to close.
Industries had to fire a large number of employees. From the years 1929 to 1932, unemployment rose by 607%. The impact on the public was devastating. Families who had once enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle were now struggling to make ends meet. Many lost their life savings when banks collapsed, and the inability to find work meant that basic necessities like food and shelter became unaffordable luxuries for millions. Homelessness soared, with shantytowns, known as Hoovervilles, springing up across the country. In the manufacturing sector, which had seen unprecedented growth during the Roaring '20s, factories now stood silent, production plummeted as demand dried up, and industrial output fell by approximately 50%. Industries such as steel, automobiles, and textiles were particularly hard hit. For example, automobile production, which had been booming, dropped from 5.3 million cars in 1929 to just 1.1 million in 1932. The agricultural sector was also in crisis. Years of overproduction and falling prices had already weakened the farming industry before the Great Depression. The collapse of the economy only worsened the situation. Farmers, burdened with debt, saw the prices of their crops plummet. The Dust Bowl, a period of severe dust storms and drought in the Midwest, added to their woes. By 1932, farm income had dropped to less than half of what it was in 1929. As a result, thousands of farmers were forced off their land, unable to make mortgage payments or afford basic necessities. The number of farms in the United States dropped by about 25% between 1929 and 1932. This displacement of rural families added to the already overwhelming urban population, exacerbating the housing and employment crises in cities. The effects of the Great Depression were not confined to the borders of the United States. This economic disaster spread worldwide, affecting many countries. International trade, which used to be strong, stopped almost completely because countries started using tariffs and other protective measures to try to save their own industries. In Europe, the impact of the Great Depression was particularly severe. Countries that had already been struggling to recover from the devastation of World War now faced even greater challenges. Germany, still burdened by reparations payments, saw its economy collapse further. The economic turmoil in Germany had far-reaching social and political consequences. The desperation and anger of the population fueled political extremism, leading to the rise of the Nazi Party and Adolf Hitler. France, Belgium, and other European nations also experienced significant economic downturns. In Asia, countries like Japan were hit hard by the collapse of global trade. The Japanese economy, heavily dependent on exports, suffered a sharp decline. Unemployment and poverty became widespread, leading to social unrest and political instability. Latin America was not immune to the effects of the Great Depression either. Countries like Brazil and Argentina, which relied heavily on exporting agricultural products, saw their economies plummet as demand dried up and prices fell. The collapse of the global economy led to a sharp decline in commodity prices, further exacerbating the situation. In response to this economic crisis, President Herbert Hoover faced criticism for his perceived inaction. He continued with his policies, believing that the economy would eventually recover on its own. The steps Hoover did ultimately take were too little, too late. As the situation worsened, the public grew increasingly unhappy with Hoover. He left office with one of the lowest approval ratings of any president in history. So in 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected as the president. Roosevelt offered a new approach. He promised a New Deal for the American people, a series of programs and reforms aimed at providing relief, recovery, and reform. Roosevelt's New Deal included initiatives such as the Civilian Conservation Corps, which provided jobs for young men, the Works Progress Administration, which employed millions on public works projects, and the Social Security Act, which provided a safety net for the elderly and unemployed. Roosevelt's policies marked a significant departure from Hoover's approach. He believed in government intervention to stimulate the economy and provide relief to those suffering from the effects of the Great Depression. Roosevelt's New Deal programs aimed to put people back to work, restore confidence in the banking system, and provide a safety net for those in need.
I do not want to think that it is the destiny of any American to remain permanently on relief roll. But as for this country, I stand or fall by my refusal to accept as a necessary condition of our future a permanent army of unemployed.
Under Roosevelt's leadership, the country began to see signs of recovery. The economy slowly started to improve, and the worst of the Great Depression began to recede. Whether the policies of Roosevelt ended the Depression is not known until today, but one thing that many historians agree on is that World War II played the final role in bringing an end to the Great Depression. Many economists believe that government spending on the war played a significant role in accelerating the recovery from the Great Depression, particularly in reducing unemployment. In the United States, the mobilization moved approximately 10 million people out of the civilian labor force and into the war effort. This massive shift finally eliminated the last effects of the Great Depression, bringing the U.S. unemployment rate down below 10%. The causes of the Depression and the reasons for its end are still subjects of debate. While there have been other economic disasters since then, the Great Depression stands as an unparalleled economic catastrophe with no equal in modern times. By learning from history and working towards a more equitable and stable future, we can strive to prevent such devastating economic collapses from occurring again.